Okay, folks, welcome. Today I'm going to cover what I call the backyard garden bed. In the future, this section here, this bed that's incomplete, and all the way down to where these ash juniper trees are, this all will be included in the backyard garden bed. But for right now, I've already covered this section in other videos. I have a detailed video on garden bed creation that I have not published yet. But so I'm not going to do a lot with that section. I just want to mention that in the future it will be part of what I'm calling the backyard. So let's get to that update. First, I'm going to just get an up-close picture of this rose because I think it's pretty. I've covered the rose bushes in the cut flower video, so I'm not going to talk about them here, but I like pretty flowers. All right, so I'm going to look at it. And I also want to mention the dandelions. This is the only place in the yard this year where I had dandelions. Usually, most years, they're all over the place, helping me keep the Bermuda grass managed. But this year, this is the only place they came up. Why am I bringing dandelions up there? They are edible, if you don't know that already. And I actually personally think they're quite tasty, so it's worth looking into. I wanted to mention that in my cut flower video, between the time I made it and now, there's been some changes. I have some flowers that have showed themselves as not dead. This, what you're seeing right here is a dahlia. A real pretty dahlia. It has like a burgundy color. And some other flowers have started to express themselves. They were up in the video, I just didn't notice them. But this little guy, you see these little purple flowers? Little weird, thin looking stem. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's been planted. This cut flower bed, I initially picked the crops, but then, it was very pretty, and then my wife took it from me and started doing things. So she probably has things in here I don't even know she did. But you see there's another flower that you don't see in the cut flower video. And I think that this is, well, I'm not going to say because I'm not really sure what it is. So let's see. All right, so that should cover that layer. Anything that I missed in that first video, I think we're good there. So now let's cover what I came here to do. This tree, that tree, and this one. These are Chickasaw plums. How tall are they? I'm guessing about 12, maybe 15 feet. They're all quite healthy. You see this one Chickasaw is staked out. We had a storm this spring, 70-mile-an-hour winds, and the front part where the roots are actually came completely out of the ground and the tree blew over. So staked it out, fixed the soil, and I think that it's doing quite well. As a matter of fact, I mentioned that these love to send out suckers, and this is a very recent sucker that came out from that tree. So I think the roots have hopefully recovered, and I'm not going to lose the tree. Plus, it looks healthy, plenty of green leaves on it. So I think we're out of the woods on that one, which is good news. I want to show the trunk on this one. See how it's a split trunk right there, real low to the ground. It's not natural. A cottontail rabbit did that for me. First year I planted them, the cottontail decided that all of my trees needed to be pruned. So he came along and bit the trunk right in half, eliminating all of the foliage from everything that I planted. That year was a drought year. It was when I first started the permaculture farm, so there wasn't a lot of native food in my yard. So when I planted those, I mean, he thought I was serving him a buffet. And, well, her, actually, because she had babies in my yard. They often do. The rabbits often have babies in my yard every spring. So they no longer attack my plants because I have loads of food everywhere. But I want to point this out because some of them did survive. And the ones that did survive did a little better than the ones that didn't get chewed up by a cottontail. And by better, I mean there were more terminating branches at the end, so ultimately you get more flowers on that tree. So maybe Mr. Cottontail knows what he's doing, but he did kill quite a few of them because it was a drought year. If I didn't intervene, they almost for sure would have all died. So it's not necessarily a good thing, but you know, it's something that is likely going to happen if you're doing something like this, because when you first establish a permaculture system, your system is out of balance. So you're going to be throwing native food out, and the wildlife is going to go after it until you hit a certain critical mass. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's see. And we were encountering yet another one of those rose bushes. You can see it's gotten very shady. There's pretty decent canopy forming here. This tree, the trunk you see down there, right there, is a hard-ired nectarine. I bought it at Stark Brothers. I love nectarines. I like them better than peaches, and I think that nectarines in my location grow better than peaches here. Less pests go after them. They tend to perform better. So I got myself a hard-iron nectarine. It wasn't supposed to be this big, but it should be about reaching its maximum height. It's around 15 to 20 feet somewhere. It has produced fruit. This year it did not. Let's see. And we're going to go into the woods here. And here's another nectarine. I planted a year after, and it's about 12 feet. I think it's Fantasia variety, also a Stark Brothers tree. Okay. All right. And that Fantasia did not produce fruit this year. It was the first year that it flowered. Okay, and we have a quince. It's not very tall, probably about 8 to 10 inches. And another quince. Now these quince have been in the ground for 2 years. I have this nectarine I mentioned, and this limb, this lower limb behind here, and this little limb are almost definitely going to be cut. They're not going to exist next spring. And because I want to get some more light from this direction into this guy right here, this nanking cherry. It's doing really well. It's doing better than most of the nanking cherries, and I think the shade is the factor. But it didn't grow a whole lot, and I think it could be drought. But these are really drought tolerant. They don't seem to need a lot of water. They almost seem to not like a lot of water. So I think that getting some more solar energy into it might get it to grow a little faster. Okay. All right, you see this tree. I'll come back to it in a second. I want to do this one on the ground below it. This is a quince. And the quince, I believe, max height is about 3 foot tall. And why do I have so many quince? Because I make jelly. So quince, it produces a fruit that I can create my own pectin from, fruit pectin. All right, so this tree I'm going to come back to. It is a black mulberry. Chinese, I believe it's from China. It's not native to America. So why am I growing it? Well, there is a native Texas mulberry, but I have not been able to get my hands on it. I've hiked, I've looked for nurseries, I've talked to people, just haven't been able to get one. The Texas mulberry is shorter, smaller tree than the black mulberry. When I went out and picked my black mulberry, I did not get a full-size tree. This particular black mulberry is a dwarf version of the black mulberry. So it should, since I couldn't get an actual Texas mulberry, I picked a dwarf black mulberry, which is the nearest analog that I could find, until I can get my hands on the actual native tree that I want. In the meantime, I'll get fruit. The wildlife does enjoy it. I'm not particularly thrilled about growing it because I think it can hybridize with the Texas mulberry, and that's a threat to the Texas mulberry. But in my area, I've hiked all over this county in every inch that I can get access to, and I've never seen a Texas mulberry. So I don't think that we're really going to run into that problem here. So when I pick my crops, well, let me just show you what you'll see here. is an elderberry. And this is the tallest one on the property. It's probably close to 4 feet high. It's been in the ground for a couple years at least, maybe more. It requires a lot of water, but it's a fruit-bearing shrub. So back to how I pick my crops. I'll try to be quick here. If I'm looking at a certain layer, say the canopy layer, first thing I'm going to do is look for native species that occupy that layer at the, say, level 4 ecoregion. My level 3 ecoregion is the cross timbers. You actually can get more detail level 4 ecoregions, and I think there may be level 5 ecoregions. So I will look at that level to see what are the native species in that ecoregion. And if I don't have any that produce fruit, or maybe I've already got them and I want to find a different one for diversity, I will then look at the level 3 ecoregion, and then I will go up to the level 2, and so on, and then to the state level to look for a native. And then if I can't find one at the state level, I'll look at the United States. Can't find one at the United States level that's native, then I will look for a foreign species that will naturalize instead of becoming invasive. And that's generally the process I use for picking my crops. When it comes to domestic crops, I will do research to find out what is the wild ancestor of this domestic crop and what was the native environment of it. I will try to get wild ancestors of crops, but your wild varieties will not yield as much as your domesticated varieties, which makes total sense. A wild species is like a wild plant is like a wild animal. It is not concerned with what you want. It has its own agenda. It wants to survive. So all of its adaptations are for survival, not necessarily food production. So going with domesticated crops rather than natives, if you're trying to produce food for yourself, is going to be the only way you can go unless you have a lot of land. If you look at indigenous people in the area and when they lived off the land, how much it actually took to sustain them. If you have a small space like I do, if you're trying to create food, you're going to be doing some domesticated crops. So by looking at the wild ancestors, I've been able to land on varieties of domestic crops that actually do pretty well here. Would I suggest everyone do it my way? Not necessarily, but it seems to be working okay for me. There's a certain balance that I'm trying to strike here. So, whether or not I achieved it and succeeded, time will tell. But I did want to describe, how I'm choosing what I'm planting here. Some decisions on choosing what I plant here are arbitrary, or somewhat arbitrary, like this fig tree behind it. This is a Celeste fig, and we'll get closer here, and you'll see that it does have figs. So I have never had a fig up until I planted this tree. So you can get another fig on there. Is it? Yeah, you see it in there. I'm a Texas boy. Figs don't really grow real well in my area. So you go to the grocery store, you're not going to see fresh figs. I never had one my whole life. Grew this tree, had one, delicious, changed my life. I can't go back. So some of the stuff I'm growing, like the nectarines, the thought that went into it is I like them. They're not invasive, so I'm going to grow them. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. This tree here is a dwarf nectarine, Garden Delight, maximum height around 6 to 8 feet. And behind it is supposed to be, this one right here, supposed to be a dwarf nectarine. I don't think it's a dwarf nectarine, but it's the only nectarine that produced fruit this year. And they were large fruit and delicious. So even though I don't necessarily believe that, this was a gift tree, by the way, I don't necessarily believe that it is what it says it is, I'm still going to grow it because it tended to do okay when all the rest of them did not. So I'm not going to get rid of it right now. Okay, to make sure I'm not missing anything before I move on here. Yes, I want to talk about this. You see, we have the Chickasaws over here. They eventually will be taller than this nectarine. You get this tall nectarine, but then you see that you have a fig tree, which in this environment doesn't get terribly tall. And then you got this dwarf mulberry, and then on this edge you have some dwarf trees. And then you get down to this bed, And you see there are no trees. So what you should be noticing is this gradual reduction in canopy height as you come this direction. And that is, so this garden bed here and this one here will get sunlight. This direction here is west. So some of these plants, you need 8-10 hours of sunlight. So I want to start getting it in the morning, and I don't want there to be shade until late afternoon. So that's some of the reason I chose these plants. And I mentioned this elderberry, and I mentioned that, you know, it takes a more resource and effort than I really want it to. But I need a fruit-bearing shrub for my system. Now, I've tried hazelnuts, I've tried this. I've looked at fruit-bearing shrubs in my ecoregion, and off the top of my head right now on this video, I don't recall any. Or if they do exist, they don't produce very much fruit. So there are some fruit-bearing shrubs that are native to Texas, but for whatever reason, I landed on elderberry, probably commercial. I think it's probably that there's more potential for to make money from elderberry, but it also is. I have been struggling trying to find a suitable shrub layer edible that's native enough for this farm. So I'm kind of still in the market for it. So why am I mentioning this right now? Because these little dwarf trees, and some trees they're not dwarf, but they're just naturally short, like the nanking cherry, maybe your Texas persimmon, they can kind of serve as your shrub layer. They're not technically shrubs, but they don't get much larger than shrubs, and they can kind of serve that niche in the ecosystem. So let's see here. I want to come back to this garden bed down here. I'm going to finish the trees first. And I've mentioned this little gift nectarine. Come back here. And let's see. This tree you see right there is a Ayers pear. I've covered 2 Warren pears, full-size Warren pears. I've got a dwarf moonglow pear by my water faucet. And then you see Ayers pear, and for some reason, we're getting really weird behavior. It's flowering in September. The other tree I'm going to cover here, this is the last one in, well, not really technically the last one, but the last one in this section coming from this direction straight over. And this is a brown turkey fig, and you see it's loaded down with figs, much more than the Celeste. It grows better than the Celeste. So I would suggest if you want a fig tree, go with the brown turkey fig, skip over the Celeste fig. And this particular fig tree, you see it's got a mustang grape growing on it, which I didn't plant it here, but I'm going to leave it here because Mr. Grape here knows exactly what it needs to do. You can see it's sending up its little stem. It knows exactly what to do because this is like ready-made trellis territory for it. It's got all the room to run. So let's hope it produces fruit. Okay. Now I'm going to squat down here. If you look, you see some green broadleaf stuff here. I'm about to go and give a little talk about that. But before I get over there, I want you to see this little bit of green here. In my video covering my bed that I built for root crops, I show a artichoke, a purple artichoke that I thought it had died in the drought, but it actually come back. And this is another one. I thought it may not be a viable crop for permaculture in this area, but now that I'm seeing this, I'm thinking this is good news. This is a crop that can do well. In my Snowmageddon video, you see that I had these things covered in snow. They just brush it off like nothing, and now it's been through stage 5 drought and a heat wave, and just grown right back. So I think this is going to be a crop that I'll be able to use going forward. When it starts to grow really well, it'll pup off, and you can take those little pups and propagate it all over your yard, new plants. So while I'm down here, I'm going to go ahead. This little green plant here is a sad little peanut. Okay, we'll come back to this bed because there's stuff in there to cover. All right, this broadleaf plant. This is Doc. I mention it in my side yard garden bed video. That side yard garden bed is actually the southernmost bed on my property. Why am I covering Doc? Because it's edible. The seeds can be ground into a flour. They're supposed to be edible. I have not personally eaten the seeds yet. But the leaves I have, the fresh young shoots when it sends up its flowering stalk are edible. These little tiny leaves, if they're tender, they're edible. Now, when you pick it, what's the word? Mucinilogenous. The more mucinilogenous it is, actually the more edible it is. Because of that mucinilogenous effect, eating them raw, it puts some people off, but cooked, they're pretty good. They have like a lemony flavor. Now, this specific species of dock, I believe, is broadleaf dock. I don't believe it's curly dock, but both broadleaf and curly dock are edible. So it doesn't really matter. Like I said, it's like a slight lemony flavor. It's similar to the French sorrel that I grow on this property. And I mentioned I had challenges with French sorrel in that it grows great during the winter. It's a perennial. It seeds, but the seeds haven't self-seeded yet. They haven't come up. That could just be because I haven't hit critical mass on the seeds. It's a winter leafy green that you can eat because, like I said, it grows good in the winter. But in the summer, it's just a lot of effort to keep it alive. So I'm not sure it's going to be a good crop. This dock here, I think, is going to be an excellent replacement for it. It grows decently into the colder months. I haven't paid attention to see if it will survive snow. I don't think that it does. It's annual. It grows like crazy. It doesn't take anything really to propagate. It's growing here because I put it here. I collect this on any of my natives. Actually, this is not native, but on any of my naturalized or native crops, more wild crops, I do encourage them to grow where I want them to grow by collecting seed and spreading it. I'll explain why I put it here in this spot here in a sec, but you can see how prolific it is. There's just so much of it, and it's all edible. It's all an edible green. So I think this may be what I'm going to replace the sorrel with. Now, I mentioned it is not native. It's naturalized. It's a lot like the dandelion. However, it is a bit more aggressive than the dandelion. It can kind of take over spots in your yard. So if that's not something you want, you may not want this crop. So why is it growing here? Well, I've noticed that the shade doesn't affect it. It can grow in almost total shade. In this spot, it's almost total shade. And it doesn't seem to miss a beat. So I have spots in my yard that are shaded that wouldn't be suitable for most crops. This would be a candidate. The other reason is that this little spot in here was lousy with Bermuda, and I was getting tired of having to come in here and mow it. And you can see that this crop also seems to be rather effective in Bermuda grass management, in suppression. So that's another benefit of it. It has a tap root, and I think that the root, I'm not sure if the science is definitive on it. I've not personally consumed the root, but I think there may be some investigation being done for medicinal effects of the root. I've mentioned the seeds are edible and the shoots and young leaves. So, very useful plant. I'm very glad that it's here. Curly dock, broadleaf dock. All right. Let's go back up into the garden that has no trees. You can see, get some lovely little flowers. These flowers you're seeing, I'll try to get the camera to focus for you. These flowers you're seeing are wild rocket arugula. I think that's a more wild variety of arugula. It's where I'm growing it, it behaves like a perennial. Comes back year over year. Prolific with seeds. I haven't got it to self-seed yet, although I have collected the seeds and grown them myself, sprouted them myself. So in my snow video, you'll see in the yard, you'll see these spots that are like 3 foot high covered in snow. Underneath that are plants, and those plants are domestic arugula. At one time, I had arugula self-seeding on this property. And then after a couple seasons of self-seeding, it just didn't anymore. And maybe it was the snow, maybe not. Maybe it's something I did. I doubt it, though. But Arugula is a great crop to grow with little effort in this environment, but this wild rocket, it's just about as productive as domestic arugula. It's perennial, so you don't have to plant it year over year, and it also does produce seeds, and hopefully we'll see if it can spread itself. So that's what that is. You can see the ever-present Georgia collard and chard, because these greens are pretty winter hardy. You see this here is a turmeric, a black turmeric. I've got both black turmeric and your regular common like orange colored turmeric in this garden bed. Got peanut right there. Let's see. There's the croton always there. Underneath the croton, all down this back side, this very edge of the garden, all on the back, I had turmeric growing, and up until about 3 weeks ago, it was growing. And down here, I had black turmeric, and up there I had the orange turmeric. But all the turmeric on the outside of the garden bed, the part that gets the most sun, died back. Wasn't for a lack of water. Not sure why, but I have had this happen before. And in my root crop garden bed, I have turmeric, and the same thing happens there. It'll be the middle of the summer, super hot, super sunny. You can give it water, and it's like you can't give it enough, and then it will just die back. And then next season comes around, it comes right back up. So I'm hoping that's what's going to happen here. If not, then those areas where the turmeric died, I'll probably backfill it with potatoes. Because I'll be honest with you, the turmeric, even though it has some useful medicinal value, it takes a lot of water for me to grow here in this soil. So I don't know that I want to keep growing it or put a lot of effort into it. All right, we've got a tree collard, and it's not looking so great, but it's enough for what I need it for, which is to just take cuttings and propagate it over the winter. So that way it doesn't disappear off the property. You got a peanut down in there. That's a peanut. And this little shrub right here, it's about 2.5 foot high, is a chile pekin. A pretty one. It fruits all over it. And on the other side of it, we got a couple turmeric. Let's see what else we got down in there. We got a peanut, and we've got another turmeric. Like I said, all the turmeric in this row here is still alive, and it gets a lot of shade. All the turmeric there died back, so fingers crossed. Of course, you'll probably seen in the video already, loads of sunflower. We've already discussed the benefits of having sunflower. Not going to go into it here. And then this little guy right there is a quince. There's also, in most of my beds, I have dormant wild onion and dormant garlic. The garlic that I have was procured about 17 years ago. This elderly lady in my neighborhood, my old neighborhood, was clearing out a flower bed, and I discovered she had this garlic growing in there, and I asked her if I could have it, and that's where I got it from. Don't ask me what type of garlic it is. It's definitely not purple garlic, I know that. There's another peanut. Okay. All right, moving down here, we have some quince. These are like 3 years old. This quince, another quince, lemon balm, and another quince. I had lemon balm in a couple other videos and some other beds, and at the time it was brown. It looked like it had died, but with the rain, everything's sprouting back. And all the lemon balm is still doing really good. We got another peanut. We getting flowers on this guy? Looks like we may be. Now, this dead tree or shrub, this is a hazelnut. I was growing in a pot for 3 years. I thought, well, all the hazelnut I had is it grows pretty good in the shade, so I'm going to plant it in full sun. It was not very smart. It did pretty well until about the end of June, and then it just couldn't hack it and died back. I'm pretty sure that it's dead. I don't know what I'm going to backfill it with, but it won't be hazelnut. Probably nanking cherry or maybe a Mexican plum or something. This is a nanking cherry planted this year, and it was growing well until about 3 weeks ago or so, and then died back. Now, I've had this happen before with nanking cherry, so I'm not going to say that this is a completely dead tree. Got some basil. I don't think I've covered this little guy yet. This is another dwarf nectarine, Garden Delight. We've got another nanking cherry. This one's been in the ground for 2 years. It was thriving, and then, like the others, about 3 weeks ago, it decided that it had enough, and it was going to do this. And then the nanking cherry right next to it, planted at the exact same time, is thriving. Same conditions, same soil. This one's thriving. So, and we've got this little dead guy here is a formal, it's a hazelnut. Same situation as the other. It gets full sun here all day, and I haven't had any luck with hazelnut in the full sun in this area. We've got mint, common mint. At one time, this was all in here like carpet, but the drought, there's been some dieback. I'm going to cover this right here. This is a briar. And why am I covering it? Because the root of briar is edible. Okay, and you see in this garden bed, there's plenty of room for more stuff. Okay, and this bucket. Let me discuss the bucket. I brought some kitchen scraps out here this morning. I lift up, so I throw the wood that I have in there. If you're going to do like a hugelkultur, they'll tell you to use deciduous wood. Well, what if you don't have that? So I use what I got. I throw the conifer wood, the ash juniper wood in there, and throw kitchen scraps and cover it with straw hay or whatever. I throw leaves in there, and then after some time, those logs, they get a bit rotten, and I pull them out of there. And the hard wood I'll take out, but the bark and stuff, it all falls off. I leave it all in there. So at the very bottom, I've got all this decaying organic matter, and then on top of that, I can throw soil, and eventually this will be a place that I grow stuff. Just haven't got around to it yet. On the edge of this bed, so I mentioned the mint. That's supposed to be like as a rhizome barrier for Bermuda grass. And I also have chives growing here, and I'm going to be spreading them in, and that will also be a rhizome barrier for Bermuda grass to keep it out of this bed. And I think, folks, that finishes this section of the yard. I don't think I missed anything.